Okay, ready? Go.
Okay. So, for as long as I can remember at least, there's always been like mass social rivalries from like McDonald's to Burger King, Georgia Tech. Marvel and DC has been one of the most debated topics, at least among my nerdy friends. And I personally think DC is a better comic book and just in general TV series-wise, movie-wise, just a better company versus Marvel. But it's really hard to argue that without like putting opinions in of like, oh, I just like them because these characters are better versus them. So I'm looking at this from a more popularity and monetary standpoint. DC, it far exceeds Marvel. First thing is the most obvious one. Marvel has lately been making great movies like The Avengers and Captain America, Iron Man. But I'd like to point out that DC has made Batman in the last year or so, just like one release, and Superman, which a lot of people saw. But compared to Marvel, Marvel has made so many more movies. Like, they average per year 4 movies versus DC, which averages maybe 1 movie a year. And what I like to point out for that is quality versus quantity. DC, on average, the popularity of one of their movies exceeds any Marvel movie. But because Marvel makes so many movies, they end up making more money off of them. So I like to point out for Marvel, see this picture up here? This is Howard the Duck, who was a superhero that Marvel made, and they decided to make a movie off of him. It received like the worst views, or like people just hated the movie. It's a creepy looking duck. So basically, what I say with that is like parallel to archery, where you have a bunch of arrows, and if you shoot enough arrows, eventually you're going to get a few bullseyes. But with DC, at least they take the time to aim with the few arrows that they have in order to get what they need. And so, movie-wise, DC makes more higher-standing movies, and you can always count on their movies being very well made and like produced and stuff. Versus Marvel, you can expect them to make 4 to 5 movies per year and hope that 1 or 2 of them will make enough money to help budget out the costs. Another thing besides movies is TV series, which animated-wise, DC is basically unchallenged. Marvel has made the animated Spider-Man series, which did pretty well, but DC kind of curb stomps them every time Marvel comes out with a TV show, at least for kids, because DC likes to go and team up with Cartoon Network and stuff. So Teen Titans basically destroyed any superhero TV series for like 2-3 years ago for like a good running several seasons. The TV show series-wise, DC tends to be on the upper hand. And then, which brings me to video games. Now, Marvel, in the past 2 years, has literally made Lego Marvel and Spider-Man 2, versus DC. In the past 2 years, they've created Batman Arkham City, Batman Legos 2, Injustice Gods Among Us, another Batman Arkham game, and a mass multiplayer online game, MMO, of DC Universe. Basically, they've made a lot more video games than Marvel did, but the difference is, but going back to the movies thing, quality versus quantity, each one of these games produced way more revenue than either of these. Another thing I'd like to clarify, DC and Marvel aren't owned by the same company. DC is backed by Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers owns them. Marvel is owned by Disney. And another thing to point out, which is kind of really ironic and funny, is that Lego Marvel, like basically the only game that Marvel made in the past 2 years, it was made by Warner Brothers. Because Disney, they realized that if they wanted to make an actual good video game for Marvel, that they'd have to go to outside sources. And since Warner Brothers is so good at making video games, they literally went to their rival and asked them to make a video game for them. Sorry. So it was just kind of one of those underhanded moments. What you don't realize is that Marvel basically was saying, or at least Disney was that we aren't competent enough to make a good video game that can make a lot of money and people will enjoy. So can you please make one for us since you have been so successful in video games? And then lastly, but basically the origin of all of this is comic books. And comic book wise, DC still beats out Marvel. I have some information here. It says January 2014 comic book sales figures. Basically the #1 comic book title that's going to be sold in 2014 is Batman, with at least estimated sales over 100,000, versus number 3 on the list, which is the Avengers World Comic Series, which will only make around 86,000 sales, which basically, and number 2 is Detective Comics, which is also owned by DC. So basically, chart topper wise, DC is, again, on top as far as comic books, which is where most of their fandom and stuff comes from. Basically, people start off with the comic books, go to video games, movies, stuff like that. So DC is on top of all the different categories as far as movies, video games, comic books, which makes Marvel seem to fall flat in some of them. But the reason why I think a lot of people like Marvel is because of how popular it is, because they keep revving out movie after movie after movie. So it seems like it's staying in the popular limelight for a long time. But in actuality, DC's making more profit, and they're making more higher standing products.